my personal opinion is that's why ISG bought in the data thing, because it was already late.
Federico, really nice to have you here. Federico is joining us on the podcast today. He's worked at a number of high-profile construction companies, mainly working or leading data and transformation teams. So yeah, as I said, really excited to have you here and learn a bit more about what you've been working on.
Thank you. Yeah, how long you got? I never started in data. I started in advertising, doing UX design for digital products. So I was always in the software side of things, but in the user experience. Then after a few years, I moved into the product side of things, where I managed UX designers and technical people building still software. Then I think naturally that software started becoming more data type of software, analytics platforms. It was never something that I purposefully moved into. It just happened, that one in every 10 projects is a data-led project, and then that became my speciality. So I did a lot of work for government, for banking, finance, in analytics and data, and started doing things for machine learning and artificial intelligence in fraud prevention. And then the way that I got into construction was one fine day, the CEO of Multiplex got in contact and said, we're looking for someone to build a product in construction, and we don't want them to have ever worked in construction before, because nobody's really done it properly. So we want someone from outside of the industry who's a bit entrepreneurial, etc., etc. And so I was very lucky. I was really excited. I realized I didn't know anything about construction at all, which was my catchphrase for about 2 years. I don't know anything about construction. Treat me like I'm dumb, please. And it just so happened to be that product that they wanted me to build was a data product, but they never said it when they actually hired me that it was a data product. They wanted a different type of product, and I ended up interviewing a lot of members of staff at the company saying, what are you hoping this product's going to achieve for you, and standard sort of customer development questions. And it just so transpired that their biggest pain point was data. I want to ask two people the same question and get the same answer. Like, I want a single source of truth. I don't want to spend hours of my day reporting, and standard code questions, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with now. And so that then became a data and, really large data product I started working on as chief data officer at Multiplex, which was in construction. Stayed there for 5 years. Then after that, I went to join ISG as global director of data products, to essentially do exactly the same thing. Some might say that's boring. It's just exactly the same role, but it was a different organization. ISG was structured very differently. It was a business made up of many small businesses. They all needed standardizing. They all had exactly the same problems, so forth and so forth. And then, unfortunately, as you might be aware, your listeners might be aware, ISG went into administration after a year and a half that I was there. Not my fault. And I then moved to a company called Structure Tone Building Group, STOBG, which is a massive American company that owns 14 different construction companies around the world. And essentially, to build data products for them. This time, they're, naturally, as time and technology progresses and things like this, these data products are a lot more AI-driven data products. So there's a lot more AI at play in what I'm doing today in machine learning, and even large language models than there was 8 years ago when I started at Multiplex.
Yeah. No, that's a super exciting journey from advertising all the way into construction. Before we kind of go into obviously the specific companies you worked at, just for kind of background and context, like why is data actually important for construction companies? Because I think from the outside looking in, you would think, why does a construction company even need technology? Like, why do they need to look at data? They should be building bricks and doing stuff on site. So why is it important? And obviously, I think what's really interesting that stood out there is that the CEO of Multiplex actually reached out to you. So this was a really high priority for them at the time.
Well, I think first and foremost, data is important for everybody. But it always has, it always has been and it hasn't been. I know that doesn't make sense. We've always, even from the Stone Age, relied on bits of data here and there. Of course, it wouldn't have been in a Power BI dashboard, but it would have been a bit of information, 2 people are on site instead of 5, or, the stones are arriving late. And that would have been data we would have used to manage our construction and make sure we do it on time. So it's always been important to know what's going on, essentially. That said, I think the reason, why, decade ago now, you've heard phrases like data is the new oil and we're all jumping on top of it and, everybody's taking it seriously. Yeah, the CEO of Multiplex and of ISG and of STOBG were all, saying we need the data in our organization. I think the reason why it's so important now is because knowing more about what's going on in a timely manner would enable you to be more efficient. And with so much competition that we have now, with so, geopolitical, financial, other people coming into the sector, people driving down prices, everything, we need to be more efficient to be able to be competitive. And therefore, one of the best ways to do that is by really, really knowing what's going on. And nowadays, we can not just only know what's going on, but we can predict what is going to go on. We're even going to step further to use this data to look into the future so we can be even more informed than we were before. So I think it's important for every single industry for exactly those reasons: competition, and driving efficiency.
No, great. So obviously you kind of spoken a little bit about your time at Multiplex. I'd love to obviously touch on your time at ISG since it was such a well-known company here in the UK. But before we kind of dive into, maybe what happened or, specifically about your role there, give us a bit of background on ISG and the group structure, because it was quite unique in comparison to other construction companies.
It was a great company to work for when I started. Had great members, great CEO, great CFO, Karen Booth. It was really, really fun. It was only my second construction company, so I don't have a lot to compare to. As you say, it's unique. I don't know how unique it is. That said, it was very different to Multiplex. Multiplex was a single organization that did one type of thing structured in a single way, so to speak. Whereas ISG was a single organization, but it was split into what they called different business units. Data centers, hyperscales, warehouses, construction, fit out, and I think there were 7, if I'm not mistaken. The challenge there from a data perspective is that each different business unit was its own different micro business. So they would do things in their own individual way, and they would choose their own softwares in their individual way. As long as they built their projects and they ran their business unit profitably, the way that they operated was totally up to them. So of course that becomes a challenge, because it's very difficult to compare apples with strawberries. And yeah, I mean, one of the first eye openers to me was there wasn't actually a clear understanding of just how many business units there were in the organization, and there certainly was no idea of how many projects there were going on live. And everybody you asked would give you a slightly different answer. So the problems that they had were really just simple problems. Well, let's find that out first, etc. So yeah, they were. I don't know if they're unique to other construction companies, but that was certainly a challenge.
Yeah. I think unique in the terms of, hey, they had a number of different focuses and had dedicated business units to each, which is obviously speaks to their scale. But specifically with the project that you kind of came in to lead, like if you can you share a little bit more about that product, and where it was going potentially, and how far you got with it?
So I'll start off with the how far we got with it part, and I'll answer the rest. We got really far in a really short period of time. That's because I had done this previously at Multiplex, virtually exactly the same problem. And it's funny, the more and more construction companies that I speak to, friends or colleagues or podcast, chats or whatever it is, all seem to have the same problem. I want to ask two people the same question, etc., 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 etc. We want to be more profitable. So it was solving the same thing. And so I knew construction now. I'd been in it 5 years, and it took me 18 months to know what a prelim was and really, these kind of things. So I started on the right foot, if that makes sense. To the team that I had at Multiplex came along with me to ISG, all the developers, etc., etc. And so no longer did we need to tinker with what's the right schema for the database to work in a construction for the types of questions that they have. How should we structure it, or where is the documentation for Aconex to connect to its API, which rarely exists for a lot of the softwares that we use. We already knew these things. We already had the connections or the softwares to ask them to connect. We already knew how to connect Asta, Aconex, Datascope, so forth. So I think what we did in about a year and a half was probably the equivalent of what we managed to achieve in 5 years previously. What was what did we come to fix? It was a very, very open-ended brief. I was introduced to ISG CEO by a guy called Charlie Versi, who used to be at Multiplex. And he moved over to ISG. He was there for about 6 months or so, and he said, these guys need what you did at Multiplex. And so I came over to the board and gave them this presentation of what we'd achieved at Multiplex and the kind of problems it would fix for them. And they said that's what they wanted. And what it was, saving, in the short term, saving time reporting. I've heard things of people saying I spent 50% of my month generating reports which nobody reads. 2 questions getting the same answer. I want to know before a problem occurs. I want to know everything in real time rather than ask for a report which will take 2 weeks to generate, which I don't trust, and I want to trust my data. Those are generally the problems or the quick solutions that can be fixed in the construction industry. That said, it is not the exciting stuff. The exciting stuff is when you have those questions answered and people trust them, it means that you're collecting all of your data, and it means that it's all clean, it's all good governance, etc., etc. Once you then have that, then you can start applying the really exciting things to do with data, like predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, and so forth, and start really knowing way in advance where are my problems going to be, or what should I tender on, or where's my biggest chance of success, or what teams should I put on a particular project, etc., etc. But you can't do that until you've done the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are, to your notes that you sent over yesterday, you got to get people of Excel, you got to get them trusting their data, you have to have data stewards in place, and so forth. So ultimately, they brought me in to do that. But in a year and a half, of course, we didn't get to the AI piece. We just got to the the business had standardized reporting at project level across the projects. Executives were able to see in a single way what's going on everywhere, highlighting inefficiencies or problems. So we were really at the start of our journey.
No, that sounds like a super exciting project to work on. Now, I think I've seen on one of your LinkedIn posts, you said, hey, in the projects that you've worked on, building tech was the easy part. It was actually the culture shift in the organization that's the harder part. Tell us a little bit about how you actually navigated that at some of the construction companies you've worked at, and what were some of your key big takeaways?
Well, I'd certainly like to highlight, I think what you said is bang on to my belief that the technology is the easy part. We're not building OpenAI, we're not building self-driving vehicles or robots in construction. We are way behind. So what we're doing is nothing groundbreaking. It's been done by many other industries before us. So the technology is not the difficult part. And to cement that, I've seen a lot of companies, construction and non-construction companies who have implemented the technology. They've got it. They've got the database. They've got the reports. They've got the analytics. They've got even predictive analytics. They've all got it, but it's being used by 5 people in the organization, and nobody's using it, and it hasn't done what it's supposed to do. And that's because to your point, the technology doesn't change it doesn't change people, so 20% of the role in data of my roles has always been building that technology, which is, with a good team who knows what they're doing, which I've always had a good team, touch wood, is not a problem. The challenge is getting the people to see the value in it, change their habits, use it, understand why they should use it, adopt a new way of doing things when they've already got innovation fatigue from dozens of other projects that are going on, to embed it in their everyday cycle, to, specifically for data, to even understand what data is. You can ask 10 people and they all have a different opinion of what data is. And I've asked some senior execs, give me example of how you use data in your everyday role. And the answer's been, I use OneDrive, or I use WhatsApp, so teaching people what is data, how to use it, to change their behaviors, that's far more difficult and far more time consuming than actually building the thing itself.
So how did you do it?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that question. Well, I think not two things. One thing that's really important is it has to come from the top. So I've been very lucky. Multiplex, ISG, STOBG, it's always been the board saying, we want this, it's important for us. And they've always been driving it as their, top 5 agenda across the organization. We're going to be data driven, etc., etc. So it has to come from the top. I think no matter how senior you are in the IT or data team, you're not senior enough to change some managing director's behavior. One, so it needs to come from the top. I think that is the most important thing. The next is identifying in the let me backtrack. When you're doing something, you're going to have, and you might have seen these graphs of, you've got your, guys who are excited, you've got your what's the word, early adopters, you've got the ones who are waiting until it's ready, then you've got the laggards who'll never adopt it, that sort of curve. You got to identify who are your early adopters and who are the people who are excited to do this. In my case, I tried to get, as many senior people as I could who were excited in this, just because they would have more influence than had I got a graduate who was excited, which most graduates are excited because they understand data and technology a lot better than, some, older individuals. Um, so try to understand and identify who will be your early adopters, who's excited for you to be here, and build a solution. Even a small solution doesn't need to be a 3-year project. It can be a 3-week project, and can just be taking something out of Excel and saving them an hour, bringing them on board and getting them to then say, this data thing's really cool. It's just saved me loads of time. You should really see what it does, because I myself and my team are not going to reach out to 5,000 people and change their behavior, But if we can reach out to 120 people who are all like, oh, this is really good, you should see what's going on, those 120 soon become 240 and, 480 and so forth and so forth. In that way, you start to change the culture of the organization. You have to build in agile and lean, because very often, they would have heard from the CEO, data's come in, and then wait 3 years and not see anything with it and just think, okay, that was just another initiative by the board and it's not going anywhere. They need to see straight away, here it is, here's some value that it's starting to provide you. Here it is already helping you. And then to be kept up to date with regular roadmaps, regular road shows. Okay, here's another thing. Here's it's changed again. They need to be brought along on the journey with you and see how it's positively changing the business. And so and then they need to be sold. And as you mentioned on the call last time, I think I can't remember where I read it, but someone said the most valuable career you can have at the beginning of your career is working in sales, because it'll help you so much in the rest of your life. I didn't work in sales. I worked in advertising, which is a sales element, I guess. And that's become really useful in my career later on, is selling into the business why this is useful, why they should use it, what problem is it going to fix for them, how is it going to save their time, and so forth. So I think those 2 elements, finding your early, or 3 elements, finding board buy-in, finding your early adopters, providing value quickly, 4 elements, and keeping them up to date with the public roadmap is really useful.
No, really, really good breakdown. That's super useful. And I think, I think we often underestimate how much culture plays a role in whether or not tech gets adopted. And I think a lot of companies tend to go tech first instead of people first. So that's a really good framework, I think, for any sort of business leader looking to bring in data and technology to really think about and follow.
Yeah, I agree. Look, after ISG went into administration, I had a few interviews here and there, before I found my job at STOBG. And I would know straight away whether I'd wanted a job or not. And it would be essentially, who is hiring me to do the job? If it is the board, then I know we've got the right buy-in and we're going to get things changed. If it is someone in IT, which will often happen, it'll be someone in IT looking to move this, I think this is going nowhere. Because, I can't remember what the average adoption of an IT initiative is, but it's very, very low. And it will just get seen as another thing by IT and nobody will adopt it. And no disrespect to IT or whatever, but this isn't about the technology. This is about the cultural transformation, and that really has to happen from the top.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And just kind of back onto ISG, and maybe this is the golden question here, which is, if, do you think, this is, purely your opinion, if they had done this data project maybe 3 or 4 years earlier and started to reap some of the benefits and utilize some of the, exciting technologies that would have come from it, do you think that could have prevented them from potentially the administration, or at least that situation?
Well, I'd like to caveat that I don't And I believe very few people at ISG actually know the real reason that ISG went into administration. We were never told, you know. So I don't know why it went into administration. It could have been a meteorite hit them and nothing would have saved the company from anything. I really don't know why it went into administration, you know, but obviously it ran out of money. You know, I think that's probably fair to say. But yeah, being biased, of course, I think that it would have helped, you know, because I would imagine that no company wants to go into administration. And companies go into administration where unforeseen things happen and they can't get out of the problem, or they run out of money, you know, or project became a problem, you know, they had too many problem projects, or, you know, they bid on projects that they should have never bid on. They were never going to be profitable. Data would have helped them know these things. That's assuming these were the problems. You know, like one rumor was they had some legacy projects that they bid on when they were expanding quickly, you know, and they turned out to be, you know, projects that were loss making. There's one whether it's the truth, I don't know, you know, but certainly had they had data and analytics, then, you know, it would have been able to tell them, this is not your sector. You have a very low chance of making margin in this sector. You know, this particular client in ISG don't work together. So it would have answered a lot of questions. So without knowing for sure exactly why it went into administration, I can't answer for sure. But should it be for something like we bid on projects that didn't turn out to be successful, we had the wrong members of staff, we were spending too much money, etc., 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 then 100% data could have answered these questions. Well, I mean, you know, I think sometimes when you really don't know what's going on, you panic.
Okay.
And then you say, we need data. We need data to sort this out, because I've got no idea how much money I'm spending. I've got no idea how many projects I've got. I've got no idea how many members staff is. I've got no idea about a lot of things. We need idea, and data can fix that. My personal opinion is that's why ISG bought in the data thing, because it was already late at that point, you know. Again, totally my personal opinion.
Okay. No, thank you, and I really appreciate you sharing that. So you've touched on a couple of things, you know, throughout our talk today on, like, okay, on the other side of this data exercise or data transformation, where companies actually start to structure and capture their data accurately, construction companies, that is, there's all of this upside, right? You know, the potential for predictive analytics, AI, and stuff like that. What does it actually look like? You know, I'm not sure if you got to that place of multiplex, or if you're kind of there now in your current role, like, you know, but what does it actually practically look like for business leaders who are considering it, but really thinking about, you know, what's on the other side of this, and how will this actually hit the bottom line?
So, we didn't get there at multiplex. Multiplex was getting everything in order, you know, providing real-time analytics, saving people time, so forth and so forth. We certainly didn't get there in ISG because it went into administration, although it was the brief at ISG was never the brief at multiplex, and we are there at STOBG. What it looks like in the short, you know, yeah, it's a good question, because data initially is seen as a cost center, seen as a department that's costing you money, you know, and what it should be, like most departments, is one that's actually generating you money in the organization, you know. So it's important, you know, when you're at a senior position in the data role, to show early on to the business that we are saving you money. You know, we're not a cost center, and we're not going to be a cost center for the next 5 years, and then we're going to affect your margins, you know. And that can be said for multiplex and ISG and even STOBG. You know, initially saving time reporting is saving time, you know, where people who were hired to do their jobs can actually spend 100% of their time doing their job, you know, rather than spending 50% of it reporting. So you're saving time there. You know, I've had quotes of people going into meetings, and the meetings take a lot of time because people are debating, how come you see number 13 and I see number 12, and where did you get that information from? And they're debating what's actually going on. Meetings can be shortened because people now just have the facts to talk about what is, the facts of what's actually happening on the project. So you're saving time there. In the case of ISG, there were, I'm not going to say numbers, but there were a lot of people who were hired specifically just to generate reports on projects, weekly reports, monthly reports, health and safety reports. There were even people hired just to clean data for the reporting, all roles that don't need to exist, or they can go somewhere else. They can do what they were originally hired to do, because it's so it can save money in that way. It can save money in sort of staff costs, etc., etc. So it can save money in the short term. Sorry, and the last one, and this was very pertinent at Multiplex, is there are no economies of scale when your organization has 20 different softwares that do health and safety. So you could be spending £1 million a year per software, or £100,000 a year per software doing health and safety. There are economies of scale when you're using one software across all of your organization. Economies of scale in terms of your buying power for one person. Economies of scale in terms of if a member of staff moves from project A to project B, they no longer need to waste their time learning how the software works. They already take it and they can move it somewhere else. Economies of scale in terms of IT managing softwares. They know the software, they're aware of it, they know the common problems. And last but not least, really, really important is cybersecurity as well. You've got one software, you can manage it. If you've got 20 softwares and some of them you don't even know they exist, it's very difficult to manage. So there can be cost savings done with that, and those are the early benefits. The long-term benefits, which STOBG is starting to realize, are predictive analytics. So using this pool of data that has been collected over a long period of time and actually looking for stories in that information which identify what are going to be your problem projects. Where are you most likely to have an accident? Which of your machinery is likely to break down? Which project is going to have the most defects and therefore not hit its PC date? Which project is going to erode its margin or get no contingency? And it's knowing these questions way before they actually occur, so you can do something weeks, months, maybe in some instances years in advance before the project occurred. Imagine if you could reliably answer which project should I tender on, yes or no. You could know, and you trusted that information. You could know 4 years in advance to never do that project because it's not an area where you're likely to make any profit. So that's really where you want to go. You want to have answers to questions in advance. Now, to that point, that's one of the things that is a bit of a challenge in this industry, is that people don't know to ask those questions. They're very used to asking, where did my accident occur? Which project was it? Reactive. They're very used to asking, which project has run out of money? They're very used to asking, which crane is not working today? And putting out these fires because all reporting is just on the facts of what's going on today. And so educating them that you can actually ask, what crane, when will my crane stop working, and do something about it now, is just not something that that the industry have been used to asking. And so again, that comes down to the cultural piece. It's not just about building the technology that can answer these questions. It's about making sure people are asking the right questions of those data, know where to find it, and training them and so forth.
No, it's Really, really good. And I think this is a really important one, even for the conversations that we have. Time reduction and time savings are obviously great, but I think it's really important for technology leaders to understand the upside in terms of potentially more profit and preventing some of the issues that potentially could lead to problems further down the line. So that was a really good piece. Just to kind of wrap up today, we always kind of wrap up like this for construction business leaders, directors, owners. If they're thinking, if they're kind of at that place where they kind of know they have a data problem and are thinking about next steps, what would be your three sort of pieces of advice you'd give them in terms of what direction they should be looking at, or quite simply what they should do? Some practical tips if possible.
They need to, one, make sure that the board is on board. It's going nowhere without it, as I'm so passionate about that. Without the board on board, it's not going anywhere. Or at least, someone on the board at least. So they need to make sure the board is on board. One. Two, I don't know necessarily what they should do. I can give you some examples of what I've seen some people do and it didn't work.
Okay. Yeah. Works just as well.
Pass it off to IT as an IT problem to solve, because it's computers at the end of the day. It's a computer problem, so get IT to solve the problem. It's not going to change the culture of the organization, and it's not an IT problem, to fix. So I've seen that numerous occasions, and, I then get a call, afterwards saying, can you give us a hand? And I knew that was going to be a problem just because it's not an IT problem. The other thing that I've seen is, I've seen some companies hire junior. Well, let me backtrack. What a lot of people see with data is a Power BI report. That's what they see at the end of the day. They see a Power BI interface. And so for the unknowing, that is the result of your data initiative, Now, as you know, my son can build a Power BI report. You can use an Excel as an interface to build a Power BI report. And so to a lot of people in the organization, they think we just need Power BI reports. And so what they will do is hire someone very junior who knows Power BI to build a Power BI report, and build a series of Power BI reports. And then their data initiative doesn't go anywhere. They didn't improve profits. They didn't change the cultural organization, because it's not just about Power BI reports. There's self-service analytics and making sure that the Power BI reports are asking the right questions. It's make sure that you change the culture of the organization and all the things that we've talked about. So, those are three mistakes that I've seen that I think obviously you'd want to avoid. And what I'm going to say, I don't know it's right or wrong, but, the companies that I've seen fix this have thrown, not a significant, but it's not an insignificant amount of money at the problem. It's not a cheap thing. It's not a cheap problem to solve. It doesn't need to cost you millions of pounds a year, for a large organization. It can cost you £500,000 a year for a large organization. In the grand scheme of things, there's softwares that cost more than that, but it's not a 24 grand a year problem to fix either. And also the understanding that it is not just an investment for 1 year and then you fixed it and then you can stop investing in it and move on to the next thing. Once you have a data team, you will always need a data team. And so just like when you hired your CIO to fix your computers and your Wi-Fi, you can't say we've got Wi-Fi now and we've got computers now, bye-bye IT team. You need to continuously invest in them. And so it becomes a cost and a profit center if things are done well for the duration of your business.